When you don't take time to look at it through other people's eyes. Take some time and reflect on what you believe in your soul. Cause that is the key to life. You gotta let the negativity go.
Hello, and welcome to What the Fox podcast with your two hosts, Lindsay Fox and Amber Ross. What the Fox is sponsored by Therapy Appointment, which is a practical tool for starting, growing, and managing your practice, built for therapists by therapists. We are also sponsored by Lindsay's coaching business, Conscious Healers, and we are so grateful to both of our sponsors and excited to chat with you today.
That's right. Thanks, Amber, for kicking us off. We are thrilled to actually invite a guest speaker today. Her name is Di Ciruolo, and we are thrilled to have her share her story with us. So before we dive into all the ins and outs, I just want to give a quick overview of who Di is and why you should stay tuned in this episode to hear all about her. So Di is an author, speaker, and educator in the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging fields. She's a leader in the LGBTQ plus community, a Hispanic mom of 2 young children, and a neurodiversity expert, especially ADHD. And hey, we can totally relate to that here. So she actually just completed her second book, Indomitable, and we are going to hear more about that book today because it is essentially a collection of her stories. It's a foster care memoir, and these are her very real lived experiences. So before we dive in today, I do think it is fair to say, since we do not script this podcast, we don't know what's going to come up in today's episode. So we can just throw out a casual trigger warning just in the effect, just in case, we don't know what's going to come up, but
just casually.
Yeah, just
casually, like mentally prep yourself because, while I don't know Di's story in full, and we're going to get into it, I do know that there are some traumatic pieces that we may or may not touch on today. So just mentally prepare yourself for that. But without further ado, welcome, Di.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I've been so excited to do this with y'all.
Right? We've been wanting to do this for a hot minute.
We have, and it's been on my mind, and it's like, oh God, the ADHD. Don't forget
to do the thing. That is so true.
Right? She's like, I had 2 alarms set for today. I knew I was going to make it.
I did. I won't forget. Okay.
It's true.
Yeah.
Well, so something I kind of want to lead with as to why some of this feels really important to me and why I really want to support you on your journey with sharing your story is something very few people know about me, is the fact that I actually was in foster care as a young girl. And this is not something I have ever spoken publicly about. It's not something I spent a great deal of my childhood in or involved with. It was a short window of time, but it definitely had an effect on me. And it's something that I feel that as an adult, looking back on it, very few people understand what happens within foster care and what the foster system is all about, especially people who have spent quite a bit of time in foster care. And Di, I just really want to say thank you for your vulnerability and your courage for coming out in so many different ways and sharing who you are with the world, because your voice totally matters and we're here for it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. I mean, it's so rare for me to find people that have been in foster care and are, out in the world. So I really appreciate that because it's like I said, it's just so rare. I always feel a little bit like an alien, that's crash landed into Earth sometimes,
Yeah. Well, it's not something too that people talk about in general. So maybe if they have had the experience, they don't necessarily share it.
And we don't really have that trauma vocabulary either, right? Like we don't know how to talk to each other about what we've experienced or what we've gone through. And it's very much one of those, don't talk to people about that. Oh no, people feel uncomfortable. And it's like your responsibility to close that gap based on their comfort, right? Never your own. So that's always
very powerful statement. Absolutely, too, because, I think about even as a therapist, I've worked with a number of children who are either actively in foster care or are actively being adopted or have been adopted. And there's so much shame that comes into play with even admitting that you're not living with your biological parents, or you don't know who your biological parents are. Or even the idea that you've even been adopted, not wanting to admit to being adopted.
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of times kids come up, I mean, especially kids that go into foster care, nobody wants to be different. No one wants to be that different. Nobody understands how to explain how, they weren't responsible for these differences, why they are in these situations sort of without, any safety net effectively. And we are all just trying to fit in and manage and be as small as possible when we're kids. And some of us, when we have trauma well into adulthood, trying to be as small as possible, right? I know a lot of people go through that as well. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard to do that. So that's this basically. That was I took a whole year writing this book because I did not want to do this.
I do actually.
Right? Like you're just hitting real close to home here, Di, and you don't even know it.
I actually have a very thorough understanding of that, but I also am proud as hell of you because you did the work. You did create the pause and do the work. And that is so hard on top of just lifing.
Yes, of course. I honestly got to a place and I say this in the book too, I wanted so much for it to be anybody else. I was just like, look, this has to be somebody with a different pedigree than me, somebody with different experience than me, somebody who has had it a different way than me and was able to sort of survive so that other kids like me, can see adults surviving into adulthood, see us grow older, see us be successful, see us do any of that stuff. Oh God, it cannot be me though, right? Like it has to be anybody else.
I don't want to do it. Yes.
I don't want to. But the older I got, I just realized that space was being filled by people who didn't really belong there. Instead of being like, do you know what I mean? Like I kind of, I would see people writing books like first foster care story, and it would be like a trope, and you'd be like, okay, well that wasn't it, And I finally got to the place where I realized it wasn't being held in memory for my friends that I'd lost and people that couldn't come along the way with me. And I just knew I wouldn't be able to climb any higher if I didn't address this first. So very much indignantly, like a small child, every day I'd get out of bed and like, oh, this stupid story. And I'd be writing it down, just absolutely indignant about it. So like, but
hey, sometimes you just have to throw a good tantrum, right? Like you do the thing, but throw the tantrum first, sit in it for a minute, and then just roll on.
Honor that anger, let it flow. Honor that anger.
That's exactly right. I mean, like you said, I have 2 kids. So when I had my son, at first I was like, oh, maybe I didn't think about this right. And then I had my daughter, who is a tiny Di, right? And she's a Leo. She is a pandemic baby.
We're all Leos here, by the way. We're all Leos here.
On fire, right? Like she's just an on fire kid. And when I would be getting to know her, and I just felt filled with this rage, right? Like I had this rage building within me, like, how dare they? Like, how dare they? Because when you're going through trauma as a kid, you're thinking, this is my own fault.
Absolutely.
I have done something. And of course, that's what society's telling you, right? This is your fault. We don't care about these kids. We don't care about foster kids. And we definitely say that we do. But do we? I mean,
actions, words, and all that.
Right. Wouldn't things be different if we honestly cared? You know what I mean? So,
absolutely.
I mean, our actions maybe show, and the casualness with which we throw foster care into every backstory of like every terrible human being that we have on TV, right? Oh, bounced around in foster care, then became a serial killer.
Right.
Like,
right.
Right. Who's going to say that? Who's going to be like, oh yeah, definitely, guys, that was me. Like no one. Right.
Yeah.
But the more I got to know my daughter, I just became more and more outraged because she's not needy. She's not hard. She's not, she doesn't
too much.
Right. She's not too much. She's awesome. She's on fire. She kicks doors down. I love everything about her, and who she is needed in the world that we live in, and who knows where we'll be in the future. So I assume even more so, right? Yeah. So that's what really drove me to finally write this. Just my outrage.
Wow.
Yeah.
And empowerment toward your daughter. So how beautiful.
Yes.
How beautiful for you to be that role model and that social justice warrior for your girl, and
Thank
both of
you.
your kids, obviously. But I mean,
Yes.
it's, it's, and not that it's gender specific,
Yeah.
but especially when you see yourself in a mirror like that, and it is
Yes.
your mini,
Yes.
it triggers something so much deeper
So much deeper.
within.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I really do commend you for going on this journey to get to know both uh, yourself, your inner child, your actual children, and all the things in between.
That was the whole year of progress for that. That
Yeah,
was a
it
whole
was.
year of like self therapy plus real therapy plus
Yeah.
everything.
I'm
And now
thinking,
we're
wow,
here to
you did
honest.
all that in a year? Like, that
Well,
doesn't seem
over
like
a
long
series.
enough.
God, I know. You know how you obsess about things, like especially trauma, and you just sit awake with it every
Yes.
night? Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Why,
I'm
yes, we
saying
do.
the writing was a year, but the remembering was probably about 30 years, right? Like the
Yeah.
obsessive
Mm,
remembering and the scorekeeping,
yeah.
just overall my lifetime, I would say, like all of
Mm.
us, right?
Absolutely. That's interesting that awareness of scorekeeping, because that
Yeah,
again is not something that we really talk about very often.
right.
And I think to your point, this does start at a young age because children have this innate ability, and it's of no fault of their own. It's them as humans, where children live very egocentric lives. They only
Yes.
know their own life
Right.
and their own experience, and they don't have the cognitive development to see beyond that. And
Absolutely.
so they have a unique ability to make everything their fault, even whenever it is so disjointed from reality.
Mm.
And so I'm
Mhm.
curious, what, depending on where you want to start with your journey and sharing it today, what ultimately kind of was your upbringing like in I guess, the family of origins when you were with your biological family, and that transition into foster care, and how old were you?
So I I was born to two parents who were 19 years old in the Boston area. At the time, my parents were married. They separated, got divorced before, when I was very small. So basically, it's me, my middle brother, and my youngest brother. My middle brother and younger brother have different fathers than me. Um, my birth father had a lot of sort of mental health issues and couldn't stay around effectively. And
Sure.
my birth mother was very, I don't want to just say narcissistic, but she was herself the victim of abuse and sexual
Mm.
abuse specifically. So she was kind of one of those people that rather than fighting it, she fawned at it. So she kind of
Yeah.
accepted a lot of things on my behalf, let's say. So when I was about 3, and if you can imagine just the chatterbox that I was, just the,
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't
yeah.
realize, I don't realize that there's anything wrong with what's going on with me. So I'm just saying it at school. And then the next thing you know, I am being pulled out of school. I'm being taken away. And I
Wow.
went into foster care for the first time in a non-permanent way when I was 3 years old. And we
Mm,
kind of went in and out of foster care for a while until I was 5. My birth mother's boyfriend, and again, trigger warning, please do shut me off if you can't have this conversation today with me, and that's okay. My birth mother's boyfriend at the time began sexually abusing me because she became pregnant.
Mm.
So,
mm,
pregnant with my youngest brother. So he would be walking around the apartment naked, all of these other types of things. And I didn't, I didn't understand why this was happening. I didn't understand how to fight it. I didn't understand how to deal with it. And I certainly didn't know how to advocate for myself, but I did know something was wrong with that.
Yeah.
So
hmm
I remember going to school and telling my teacher, and they finally pulled me out for a more serious stay in foster care. My birth mother stayed in that relationship for quite a long time, and eventually we he called the police and had us removed from his apartment. And I tell that story in my book. So
Oh, wow.
I went into foster care on a more permanent basis when I was around 6 years old because my birth mother, again, was dating a very violent, dangerous person.
hmm
DCFS was watching us more regularly at that point, and so it was really the last time. One of my longest foster care situations was I was in a trailer with a lot of other kids who couldn't be placed in more safe situations than they were
Yeah.
in. Basically, the system had decided that these were all kids that couldn't be placed, and we all ended up in this, 3-bedroom trailer outside of Boston, and it was eventually closed down because one of the verbal kids was able to tell what was happening. And it actually made the news because it was so egregious. So that being said, I guess the next story is that I get placed with a more, I don't want to say this. I get placed in a new foster family, and it's in a more upscale area of town. I think that this is just one of the best things, but unfortunately, the foster mother is a narcissist. So I'm being told all the time that this is what I deserve, going through all kinds of different abuse, which I detail in my book. But
Yeah.
really, it goes from bad to worse until I sort of become old enough to take care of myself, So
Yeah. And I just want to take a pause first before we
yes,
even jump to next
please pause it.
stages, right? No, you're fine, and thank you for sharing everything that
Yes.
you've just shared, because I understand that there's a lot there, and I also kind of want to take a moment to just acknowledge, in the context of trauma and reliving trauma, the research supports that, too, getting into all the detailing of all the ins and outs is not necessarily effective or therapeutic toward healing our trauma wounding. And so I do want you to know, and I want our audience to understand and have a knowingness that it's okay to not get into all the ins and outs and all the details and recalling all of that. And so while it can be therapeutic for some, it's not a one size fits all approach for everyone. And also, just with, I want to kind of go back to what you were saying around there not being enough spaces to place all the children in need who are being pulled and placed or attempted to be placed. I really want our listeners to understand that this is not a unique, I do air quotes, unique experience that Di is expressing as an individual who has been in foster care. This is actually a very deeply common problem within the system that we need to bring awareness to.
Internationally, it's a very common situation.
Absolutely,
exactly right.
because there simply are not enough people, there are not enough adults out there who are responsible, caring adults with the ability to offer the kind of support that is needed, frankly, to say, hey, I'm willing and able to be a foster parent. And I mean, to be completely transparent, this is something that I have absolutely considered in my adult life. And while I'm not there yet, it is certainly something that I've certainly spent a great deal of time reflecting on, because it is such a deeply wounded part of our system where the wrong people are the ones who are motivated and then enticed due to government systemic issues to become the foster parents.
Absolutely right. They have their own motivations, and a lot of the time it's, a lot of my experience was people who were in these situations, quote unquote, to help children, were very much the opposite of that. Weren't interested
Correct.
in helping children. They were interested in sort of virtue signaling that they helped children. Right? Does that make sense? They were more interested
Absolutely.
in the appearance of helping children than actually helping children.
Absolutely. I almost associate it with how Munchausen by proxy works.
Literally. Yep, that's exactly right. And it attracts the people it attracts. That's exactly right.
And so exploitation is certainly quite common on a lot of different levels, whether it's emotional, physical, you name it. And unfortunately, there are people that slip through the cracks where abusers are the ones who are then hired by the government to become foster parents.
Yep.
And so I just, I think this is the piece where again, to your point, Dive, earlier, like, yeah, there's like this stigma or this thought of like, yeah, you've been in the foster system. Of course, you're going to come out with antisocial tendencies and you must be a
Mhm.
sociopath. And it's like,
Mhm.
no, that's not how that works. And
That's
it's
not how
not
that works.
always bad either. So, I mean,
Right.
I think that all the other side of the coin also needs to be stated and validated, where
Yeah,
it's not always a horror story either. There
of
are some really
course.
wonderful, beautiful families out there that do this
There
for the
are.
right reason.
Exactly. That's exactly right. There are, and we shouldn't let go of the idea that it can be better just because I had a horror story, right? There are people who are doing it right. There are people who have done it right. And us using our own lenses to limit people that way is just as harmful, right? So
Mhm.
this is exactly why I'm trying, like, not, and I appreciate you saying that it's very difficult sometimes to sort of relive that trauma. For me, I gloss heavily because I try not to get stuck in sort of the story of it and
Yeah.
more the meaning behind it, right?
Yeah.
So while I do, detail probably more than I should in my book, I try when I'm talking to people about it to sort of land on the lessons more than the, because I
Yeah.
don't want to pull people into that moment and leave them there. You know what I mean?
Of
I want people to
course.
walk
Yeah.
away from it feeling like, oh, okay, she lives. Like she lives
Yes,
at the end.
that's right. That's right. And I mean, just who you are today and where you are now as a public speaker and as a mom and just all as an author, all the things. I mean, you do a lot of great work, and I do think that is a huge part of trauma recovery is that meaning making.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And being able to see other people where they are and knowing what it is rather than, I mean,
Hmm.
one of my favorite things that I do is I'm able to sort of see people and what they're tripping over, and sort of, emotionally. And I'm able to just be like, actually, it's this. And I can say that with authority. It's like one of the best things I can do is tell my story, show up for people and be like, look, I'm telling you right now, and you know that I know that you can make it, you can live, you can
Yeah,
do these things because I can do them and I'm here fighting with you, right? Like I am on this barricade with you. Let's go. We got it.
that's
And
right.
That's
I don't think there's
amazing.
enough people doing that. I just wanted to be who I needed when I was a kid. I just
Yeah.
want to be standing there just in case someone else is looking.
Absolutely. And walk through that fire together.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. Don't be scared.
Hmm.
I'm here too. I've got a lantern. We're going. Here we go.
Yeah.
You know?
I can
So
I can absolutely see how you were pulled into Lindsay's vortex. Like you two have so much in common as far as wanting to be that hand up, right? Like I'm envisioning someone
That
who's
conscious
like
healer.
lifting up. Yeah, that conscious healer to say, "Hey, yeah, you're in the mud now. Let's get out together." And that's just it's incredible.
yeah. Well, it's hard to be in the mud, but if you can recognize that you're in the mud with other people or that somebody else made it out of the mud, it can be
Yeah.
so much. It can just be that one thing. Like I
Hmm.
talk in the book quite a bit about just one person doing one kind thing and how it just sort of diverted the path that I was on and how they're all tiny, tiny examples. And it's really just to show every small thing
Mm.
changed who I would become. Every small, like little push gave me
Hmm.
that opportunity to be like, see, it's okay. There are other people like you who feel like you feel. You're going to make it. It's
Yeah.
okay. And if I just only had experience with people who were abusing me, I wouldn't have known.
Mm.
You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
wouldn't have known.
That's right. That's right. And I think let's kind of go there, right? So whenever
Yeah,
I'm
please.
hearing you talk about this of the shifting of beliefs into
Mhm.
I can and the meaning making, let's kind of go into the before side of things, right? So when all you've known is trauma, and we're rewinding a bit, when all you've known is trauma and abuse, we develop, and actually I would like to even pause before I go any further. Even if there's no trauma, okay, so even for your regular everyday people, perhaps, which
Mhm.
arguably every regular everyday people, it's like 1 in 3 people have probably
Yeah.
had trauma, but I digress.
It's probably the
So-
most common thing I run into. I would think human beings experience trauma, and maybe it's not at my level, right? Maybe it's not at our level,
sure,
but
right.
definitely every person experiences their own trauma, and it definitely hurts them the same. So I just, Very common,
in some fashion. And I
of
think
course.
there's a lot of debates around semantics there. So that's why I just want to take a moment and say, we all as human beings, no matter what your story is, we all develop distorted thought patterns at some
Mm,
level. We all develop self-limiting beliefs at some level. Whether or not it impairs your daily functioning and the way that you show up in the world is a different story.
mm,
And so I think when we look at the self-limiting beliefs piece, it's fair to acknowledge the foundation of that begins in childhood.
Mm.
So, Di, at what point do you and I as you got older, we'll say adolescence, teen years, and so forth, when these beliefs are generally there at that point, where there's a bit more of awareness of this being like a negative thought pattern that exists, that we just validate and assume to be true. We don't question it. We just know that this is who we are.
right.
What were your self-limiting beliefs as a
I
whole, and the
so I would
shoulds that
say
you kind of were exposed to?
I was regularly being told this was all I deserved, that I
Mm,
already had gotten because I had come from poverty, and this was like a Boston suburb, right? This was like a northern Boston suburb, let's say. So people were very out loud about this is more than you deserve. We are changing
Mm.
you for the better. You don't have any right to complain. We are already
mm,
giving you more than you deserve. So, in my mind, I very much thought because of who I was that I wouldn't be able to. This was as much as I could expect. This was as much as I deserved. This was as much, and that's being compounded by the fact that I'm a girl, right? So
Mhm.
like I am constantly being shouted down. Don't be too loud. Don't be too. You talk too much. You need too much.
mm.
You ask for too much. You correct people when they are wrong about history and science. Like, boys don't like that. People, adults don't
Oh.
like that. I
Mm.
know it. Like, but like adults don't like that. Boys don't like that. You need to be polite. You need to be quiet. You need to be this. All things that I could not be, right? Like, I mean, look at me. Do you think there's a
Right?
softer version of this? This is already the most soft, you know what I mean? Like, there's not.
Right.
Like, my brain is constantly chattering to me. Like,
Welcome to neurodiversity,
right?
folks.
Welcome to neurodiversity. There's like, I'm tired of hearing my voice too.
hmm
But it was
Right.
just, yeah, no. And honestly, and I had all these limiting beliefs, but alongside these limiting beliefs, I had experienced sort of like PBS, right? So like I had experienced your Mr. Rogers, and I
Mm.
always, you know what I mean? And in my mind, I had made him my uncle, and he likes me just for who I am. I like
hmm
you. LeVar Burton, I talk about this in my book. LeVar Burton teaching us to read and saying, well, don't just take my word for it. I am an obsessive reader. So even as I was living at the librarian when I was in middle school would give me books that she wanted me to screen for the other kids. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so she knew how fast I could read. And so she'd give me these stacks of books. And just not to take us off topic, but like a little old lady had died and left like her estate and all her books to the library.
Oh
Huge,
my.
like all these VC Andrews books. And like, I don't know if you've ever read VC Andrews, but nobody in middle school should be reading VC Andrews. I'm reading these books and
But you
she's like,
were.
yeah, I was. But she was like, "So, Di, did you think that they were?" And I'm like, "No, no, no. You put those in a box in the back, and definitely not." Right? So, like, even as I am being presented with these limitations by the people around me, I am also knowing that this is not everybody's experience, right? Like,
Mm,
I'm also able to see that other people lived differently, and that maybe I could live differently if I could just get
yes.
out. So
Thank
I
you
would
for
say,
even touching on that,
oh,
right, with the
yeah,
librarian, because these are
yeah,
protective factors. These
yes,
Yes.
protective factors are actually what nourish us, nurture us, and bring us to a space of understanding that there is something different on the other side.
Mm.
And, granted, the self limiting belief of whether or not you're worthy of belonging on the other side is a different story.
That comes along later. Exactly. That is a much more in-depth story. But like definitely I knew that what I was going through maybe wasn't normal and maybe wasn't normal for other kids, and that wasn't what they were going through, right? And once you notice that, it sort of becomes about hiding it, right? Whether your parents are alcoholics and you're hiding that, your dad's beating you, you're hiding that. When you realize that the other kids aren't going through this, you start hiding it. So
Yeah.
that's really the thing I was struggling with.
Sure. Well, especially too, I'm making assumptions here. Are you saying this is what you were, when you say hiding that, you mean while you were actively living with a foster family and while with bio family? Is that correct?
So I was no longer allowed to have contact with my bio family very early on because they were so,
Okay.
yeah. So let's say
Okay.
age 6, because my birth mother, and I don't want to get us too far backward, my birth mother was supposed to be sort of doing things to get us back, and that was not where she was at. So,
Sure.
yeah.
So were you adopted ultimately at any point, or did you stay in the system and age out?
So, um, their easiest answer is both. So I was not adopted, but I was placed in a guardianship, which was
Okay.
sort of the worst of both worlds, because then your social worker doesn't visit you anymore and isn't checking in with you anymore.
Mhm.
So that was at around age 11 or 12. So
Oh,
now
wow.
I am
So
not
you
being
lost a
watched.
support.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So now I'm not being watched by anybody, but my foster mother is still receiving money for me to
Yeah.
be there. So while it's best of both for her, nobody's watching what she's doing and she's still getting paid, the opposite is true for me. So
Right.
I did age out of foster care and I
Mhm.
did become homeless when I aged out. So when she decided that it was more work to keep me compliant than it was to that's when she decided I didn't need to be there anymore. And she threw me out one day and she locked the doors and she just made up the sickest story she could think, as to how I'm no longer in the family. So and, people
Right.
just believed her because narcissism, right? Or
Well,
maybe they didn't, but who knows, right?
right. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's also a sad truth. And I think again, this also brings and sheds a lot of light on a topic that we do not talk about enough, which is the fact that people do age out of this system.
Right,
And in your case, you're actually sharing and shedding light on a unique circumstance here where people can age out when it's not just a matter of being 18.
right,
And this is honestly where so much homelessness stems
exactly right.
from
Mm-hmm.
with children across America. We actually had a previous podcast recording with an Emmy Award winning actor named Mike Manning, who was a big part of a documentary about homelessness across America with foster youth. This is a huge topic that he's very passionate about, and we're hoping to have him back for a follow up on this topic after your episode because it's one of those things that again, we're not talking about it, but in the advent of social media, the hope is that the more that we can push this type of information out to people, the more awareness that we can put out there as a collective,
Yep,
the more we'll start waking up and doing something about it.
absolutely, absolutely, I agree. Yeah.
So, what age were you when you became what you describe as homeless? I mean, when you
Yes.
mention like that sounds
So
pretty young.
yes, in Massachusetts, it's 21, but it's
Mhm.
still not. And I mean, it depends because in the South, 21, you're a little bit older somehow. But like in
Wow,
Massachusetts, there's no version of that where you're able to take care of yourself or have your own place or any of that because just
so expensive too,
it's
but
so expensive. There was just
yeah.
no way. So I get thrown out. She locks all the doors. She eventually lets me come back, um, for one laundry basket that she lets me fill with just the things that I have purchased with my own money only. So I go out into the world with just this one laundry basket, right? And I have a teddy bear, and she just didn't care, right? She wanted to make sure that I was as thrown away as I could possibly be. So I had some friends. I was sleeping on a friend's couch for about 3 months. And I had some friends living in Atlanta at the time, and I'd been a bunch. Um, and
I was
basically they were
wondering
like,
where that
guys,
Southern connection came from.
right. So here that comes. So when I had a bunch of friends living there, they were going to Emory University, such smart kids. And they were like, Di, what are you doing? You're trying to buy a place in Boston? You're never going to be able to do that. You're never going to work enough hours. Why don't you just come down here and get a place? And so I did, I made a decision that you can only make when you're a crazy, 20-year-old kid. And I just packed up my stuff and moved across the country.
Girl, this
Um,
is so funny. You do not know this about me, but I did the opposite at the same age.
there you go.
I left North Carolina at 21. I had been 21 for 4 months and packed up all my stuff and moved to Boston. And then
There you
there you
go.
were at
Moving,
21
going the other
moving
way,
down to Atlanta.
going the other way.
That's so
Um,
funny.
but yeah, I moved to Atlanta. My first apartment had a washer dryer in it, and it was in a gated community for $600.
Wow.
And I thought that was like,
Queen.
oh my God, right? Queen.
You've made it.
Yes.
Exactly.
You have arrived.
I have
Oh
arrived.
my
I was able to
gosh.
stand in my living room and see all the other areas of the house, but of the apartment. But somehow it was just the most I had ever had, right?
How
So
empowering.
Yeah.
yes, exactly, exactly. So that the ability to do that and having made that decision definitely changed who I would become. Because the next thing I know, once you're out of sort of that abuse situation,
Mm.
things start looking very different. When your survival is not at stake day
Mhm.
to day in that same way, and it's just at stake in a normal way,
Yes,
eating and sleeping, right?
that's
But
right.
right, when your survival isn't at stake in that same way and you're not being abused in that same way, it really changes your ability to see the situation from the outside. And then you
Isn't
can
that
see,
something? Isn't
isn't
that
that something?
something?
Isn't that something?
Right?
Yes.
Well,
So
you can't process trauma when trauma's actively happening to you. So it's
that's exactly
amazing.
right.
It's
Yep,
amazing what we come up with when
yep,
all of a sudden we have a safe and protected environment. It's like, oh, well, damn, this is what other
absolutely.
people
Oh my
experience.
God, right? I know. What do they say? You can't heal where you were hurt. So,
Oh,
I mean, absolutely. Yeah, that was the case for me. And I, like I said, moved away, got my own place, and started making friends who never knew that I had been in foster care, who never knew that I had lived any differently from them.
a fresh
Um,
start.
yes, very
Mm.
much. And then suddenly you're driving your own car, and who do you want to be? And I mean, I talk about this, like I say in the book, I hate to keep saying this, but like I survived because the people of Atlanta wanted me to. They like I made such a community of people who just wrapped around me in a way that I didn't experience here. So it really did change who I would become. So I was very lucky in that way to be
I,
guided in that way.
I would love to hear a little bit more about that because you piqued my interest a few minutes ago when you said that a lot of this comes down to one kindness that was done and like one
Yes,
specific moment that
yes.
kind of changed the trajectory for you. And I would love for you to share that if you're willing.
Sure. So, and it's at each phase of my life, right? I
Yeah.
would say that I had like one person that was standing up for me at each phase of my life. Um, when I'm a baby, I was being locked in a room and abandoned by my birth mother, who would go. She was in a cover band, an '80s cover band, and she would leave us there, myself and my younger brother, and all we had was PBS, right? So and people looked out for us and could see us through the TV and tell us that we mattered
Mm.
and we were worthy of being loved. So that matters to me, and it changed things for me. Later on, when I'm dealing, I don't want to tell you the whole. I don't want to reveal this whole story here, but later on, I had a situation where it was Grandparents' Day when I was about 7 years old, and my grandparents couldn't come because they can't know where you are when you're in foster care.
Right.
Mm.
So everybody was reading their favorite books. I was reading Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, and this little old man who was somebody else's grandfather came over to me and asked me if I wanted to read him my story. And I told
Oh,
him I did, and I sat there and I read it to him. And the newspaper was there for some reason, and they came over and they asked him who he was, and he said he was my grandfather.
Oh,
And so
man.
they took,
Goodness. I'm about to start
so they
crying.
I know it matters. You know
Mm-mm.
what? That's what I mean. It mattered so much to me to be
Yeah.
normalized by other people that wouldn't be questioned in that same way that I would. So, yeah, I was in the newspaper with this random
With your
angel
grandpa.
with my grandfather.
With a beautiful angel on earth,
Of
as it
course,
sounds.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, later on, when we eventually took my mother's ex-boyfriend to court for his abuse of me because he was abusing other children that were nonverbal and couldn't stand up for themselves. Basically, there was a bailiff in the courtroom that just made it his mission to normalize this for me. And it just, again, just one person standing there in the gap with you and
Yeah.
just it changes everything, and it changes your ability to fight for yourself and for other people. So I didn't do this all on my own. I had people all the way through. When I moved to Atlanta, I was working for this guy named Bob, and he had not a great childhood as well. And he respected so much that I traveled from like Atlanta to Marietta every day to work for him and then
Oh
back
my gosh.
on the on the MARTA buses. And it took me like an hour and a half commute each way, but I wanted so much to honor my commitment to him that he helped me buy a car for myself. He asked me what I was doing for the holidays for Thanksgiving one year because his kids were out of town. And he and his wife hosted me with Boston Market for no reason. Nobody else was there. He had no reason to do that. He just didn't want me to be alone for Thanksgiving. So
And
That's
that
a
was
great
a
reason in
reason.
itself.
right,
Yes.
right. That's how he
Same
felt.
brain here.
I couldn't even believe that like it blew me away that strangers throughout my life saw where I was and were just like, don't worry, I'm here too, you know? And it, so I'm supposed to be here. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I'm supposed to
Yeah.
be here. So
And what I'd like, thank you so much for sharing all of that.
course.
It's absolutely powerful. I will not hold it against you that you made Lindsay and I cry. But what I'd like to key in on with what you just shared is each of those moments was something super realistic and something, I don't want to say simple, but they're not necessarily grand gestures. You know, they
No,
didn't involve huge sums of money or huge
right.
sums of time. Those were
No.
small moments that had a huge impact on a human's life. And I think we as a society need to slow down and look for those moments, because what's 5 minutes to me could be 30 years of success for that next person, could be a lifetime of changing other people's lives if I'm willing to stand in the gap with them. And I mean, we need to hold space for that. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture. It could be something,
Nope.
you know, yes, I'm her grandpa and she's reading me a story.
Yep.
I mean,
Exactly.
Small
just
acts
incredible.
of kindness go a long way.
They
That's
do.
exactly right. It absolutely changed who I would become, and it changed how I would see the world. So these weren't expensive things. These weren't like, nobody. And when people ask me about my story, they're always like, well, what should we do, Di? And it's like, read the story and see what you feel called to do. Because it doesn't have to be, but put this person through college. It doesn't have to be, put this person in your house or find a way to house another person. It can just be see that person. Let them know that you see them and that you care. It can be anything. See what you can do.
Well,
You'll
share
have
a
those
piece of
moments.
humanity,
That's
like
exactly
help
right.
someone feel human and a part of something and like
Yeah.
their life matters.
Help a child be a child,
Yes.
right? Let them know that you see them as a child and that they have value as a child or a
Yeah.
person, as it were.
Yeah. I was going to say it's just that presence of unconditional positive regard from one human to another. Just letting you know that you matter is enough. And we all have the ability to show up and just say something kind to another person. And while we might not always have the full bandwidth and all the energy to do all the things to do the work, we all have the ability to say hello or to, connect with someone on just a small level that can make a difference?
Acknowledge who you are on the inside. Acknowledge the things that you've actually dealt with, and you'll be able to see people in that place with you more. You're going to be presented throughout your life over and over again with these opportunities to help people like yourself or help people like you were. And it's up to you what you're going to do with those things. That's been my experience. So I get presented with these opportunities to stand in the gap with people and reach out all the time. And I know everybody else does too. So.
Well, honestly, Di, this has been just such an amazing pleasure to have you on. And this is, I'm so glad that we were able to finally get this worked out, because I know that, yeah, because it's like I've been wanting to have you come on for so long now, but it's like, you know what? I really do believe the alignment of timing and divine timing is definitely a thing. And so your time is now. And I actually would love to give you an opportunity to let our listeners know if they want to hire you to be a guest speaker or to do the DEI work at, for their corporation. Where do they go to find you?
So I have a whole website. I'm at diciruolo.com. So DICIRUOLO .com anytime. And I will share with you all of my, I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah, we'll put everything in the.
I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes though. That's what I mean. I think it's important for people to be able to know how to reach you. And I know that we've dedicated today's episode toward really honoring your story and letting people know, hey, you've written your second book, which is tremendous. And there's so much more than that. So that's why I just want to make sure people understand, like, you offer so many different elements of healing through different pockets. And I think it's important to highlight that. And I just one last thing though, if there's just one major takeaway that you would like to have our audience kind of process or remember about you, about your experience, something that can be a pearl of knowledge or wisdom, what would it be?
So I would say that you will run into a lot of people that will tell you that they don't think you can. You will run into a lot of people that you will tell them what you want to do with your life or what your dreams are or where you're going, and they will tell you that you can't. And that has been my experience many times over. People have said to me, well, who do you think you are? And I will be honest with you. That comment, you can't, is about how they feel about themselves. And they don't think they can, right? They don't think they can. So they're telling you that you can't because they don't want to grow or examine any of areas of their life where they might have to change a tiny bit. Don't believe them. Those are their limitations. Those are their limiting beliefs. Your thing is your thing. You know what you're here to do. Do the thing that you're here to do. Don't be stopped by other people's limitations. Don't sit in people's boxes and wait for them to accept you. If they're not going to accept you, they're not going to accept you. Move on. F them.
Yep, I'm out.
Yep.
Leave.
Yeah,
that's powerful.
Situations. Move on. You know what you're here to do. Do your thing.
That's right. I love it. Right on,
Me
girl.
too. And who do you think you are? A freaking powerhouse. That's who you are.
Don't worry about who I think I am. Worry about
worry about yourself.
That's right. That's right. Boy, this has been
beautiful.
Awesome. Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, Amber. No, but just truly thank you so much for joining us today. And for our listeners, we hope that this story has really inspired you. We would love to hear your thoughts about today's episode. And also, we just want to say thank you for being a loyal listener of What the Fox podcast. And we would greatly appreciate if you can give us a review on Spotify, on Apple, wherever you do choose to listen. If you are a YouTuber, please subscribe YouTube at What the Fox podcast, so that you can, give us a little boost so that new listeners can also tune in and know that this podcast exists. But we appreciate the ongoing support so that we can have guest speakers like Di join the podcast. So until next time, folks, we will see you next Tuesday.
See you next Tuesday. Thanks so much, Di.
And we all sing, everything is gonna be just fine. It's gonna fall into place. The sun is gonna set on your terrible day.